Material for the brain. Conversations for thinking bodies. In this show, together with our guests, we explore different ways in which we can develop a meaningful relationship with our bodies and minds and respond to the current state of the culture in a quest for more integrated and embodied perspectives. Hello and welcome to Material for the Brain podcast. The conversation I'm about to share with you today was a quite exciting conversation with Rafe Kelly, who is the founder of Evolve, Move, Play. And I will dive into it in just a moment, as I have one short announcement. For those who are living in Vienna and its vicinity, we are having our open day for the Movement Lab study group programs. And this will take place on the 15th of June. In this day, we are planning to share a few classes with you, to give you a chance to meet our team, and to make a short introduction into our school, our programs, our values, and of course, to give you some space for your questions. For those who will be able to come to the open day, we also have a surprise gift for you. If you would like to attend the open day, please go to our website at movementlab.eu/open-day, where you will be able to register and to get all the information about that. Okay, and let's move for today's episode. My guest is Rafe Kelly, who is the founder of Evolve, Move, Play. Rafe is a parkour athlete, a movement coach, and an entrepreneur. He's based in the West Coast of the United States. Rafe's approach to training goes much deeper than the physical aspect, and through his investigation into the physical, he is revolving around existential questions about meaning, connection, wisdom, and health. I was very excited to dive into this conversation with Rafe and to enter into the sense-making rabbit hole together. I hope you will enjoy it as much as I did, and I would encourage you to leave a comment or a question and enter the conversation as well. And one quick apology, the first 10 minutes of the conversation, the audio quality is not the best, as we had some technical problem, but right after that we improved it a lot, so please be patient during the period where Rafe is sharing his own story and biography. Enjoy the episode. Hello, Rafe. Welcome to Material for the Brain. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? I'm very pleased to be speaking with you.
Yeah, thank you for coming. I actually wanted to share a little bit with you kind of what led me to invite you here, as we are kind of meeting for the first time, and then to dive into your story, into the topics I've prepared for us to speak. So maybe a few years ago, maybe you know, I'm working as a dancer. I live in Vienna, and a few years ago, kind of 5-6 years ago, I started to experience kind of the pressure of identity politics kind of starting to build up around my work as a choreographer, and that kind of led me eventually to get into the sense-making corner of the internet and kind of starting to ask questions and to try to understand, like, what are these kind of political movement and how to make sense of it in my own personal life. And I've heard about you many years ago, kind of around movement, but I didn't have any connection between that two universes. And quite recently, I've seen your appearance on the Jordan Peterson podcast, and I've listened to your conversation. I was very inspired by that. And that led me to write you. And then since then, I started to dive into the things that you've been doing and listening to a lot of podcasts that you've been releasing. And I've listened to a too long conversation with John something.
Vervaeke?
No, not John Vervaeke. And Jonathan Peugeot. Yeah, exactly. Super interesting conversation. And I was super excited to see, okay, there's another person who is a movement nerd and that at the same time is very interested about those topics. Maybe there's many people out there. I haven't met them so often. So I'm very excited to have you and to kind of dive into that space with you. But before we start, I would like to give you some space to introduce yourself to the audience and also to me, because I don't know you. And if you could tell me a little bit your story, your background, what have led you to do what you do, and then to dive a little bit to what you're actually doing right now with your Evolve Move Play brand.
Yeah. So my family homesteaded in Skagit County in Northwest Washington in 1920. And so the land that I grew up on had been in my family since then.
Could you speak a little bit louder?
Yeah. How's this?
That's better.
So I grew up on this piece of land that had been my family since 1920. And my dad was a member of the counterculture, and he'd created a kind of apple orchard and hippie haven up there. And I unfortunately had learning disabilities, ADHD and dyslexia, which meant that I had to be taken out of school early. And I had a mentor who came into my life, and through training martial arts, Tang Soo Do initially, and then Aikido, and then Kung Fu, and later in my teens, Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, I was able to deal with a lot of aggression that was coming out of me through lack of kind of connection, lack of, integration with the school system. So I had that background, and also, so my mentor would roughhouse with me a lot. And then the other thing that he did was he shared epic literature with me. So one of the really foundations of our relationship was him reading The Lord of the Rings to me. And so I had
which age
sense of...
You got to read this book?
I was 8 years old.
Wow, that's kind of intense.
Yeah. So I went from reading The Lord of the Rings when I was 8 to 9 years old. I was reading the Iliad and the Odyssey, and then the Norse myths, the Elder, the sagas, and the Irish myths, the Book of the Takings of Ireland, and the Finian Cycle, and Cuchulainn, and all that stuff. So I decided by the time I was 12 that I wanted to be an anthropologist, and started studying anthropology. I read every book in the local anthropology library by the time I was 15. And then I had my mentor put me in touch with another mentor who got me into his library. So I think by the time I entered community college at 16, I had read something like 30 ethnographic monographs. So I showed up for my first introduction to anthropology course at community college, a little over-prepared and a little bit of a bear from my teachers. But yeah, so I had that passion, and then I discovered gymnastics when I was 15 after the 1996 Olympics, and got into I guess I was 14. Yeah, I got into gymnastics at that stage, which was quite hard for me because I'm a very big guy. And so I progressed very slowly in gymnastics, and it was frustrating because my older brother was not 4 years older than me, and, light and small. He picked things up fast, but I stuck with it. Eventually I got hired as a gymnastics coach because I liked working with kids. And through my older brother introduced me to parkour, and then one of my training partners in gymnastics, I told him about it because he was already doing stuff along these lines. And he was like, let's go out and do it. And so off we went. And once I discovered parkour, it was kind of like the primal underpinnings of gymnastics had been revealed to me. The stuff that made me love gymnastics was actually contained within this thing that was deeper and more transformative and more powerful and more connecting to the world. And through that, I was able to all of a sudden find a lot of my ADHD symptoms were dissipating substantially once I started parkour. So I was interested very early in the idea that these movement practices could be a transformative practice, that they were not just for fun, that they actually could help you with really fundamental problems in your life. For me, regulation of aggression as a child, and then regulation of attention really as an adult, and this ability to connect more deeply to the world. All of that was revealed to me through the practices. And it all also called back to this frame that I had absorbed as a child of the idea of the heroic journey. And for me, being able to do parkour and go out and accomplish these jumps, it felt like something somehow related to the story of Aragorn playing out in The Lord of the Rings, or Achilles in the Iliad. And in the anthropological research and in those epic literatures, the heroes had parkour abilities very often. And so the heroes of these stories, they had sword feats and fighting abilities, but they also were great jumpers and could vault over things and could do sort of like Dermot Uduvne is an Irish hero who, has this whole scene where he tricks another army into killing a bunch of their men by trying to do feats that he can do, like run up and stand on the point of a spear, or jump between two swords and land in between them, or roll down a rocky hillside on a barrel. It's all very parkour-like. So I had this idea since 2006, really, of the integration of a complete natural movement practice that took us towards the heroic archetype. And that was also when I discovered the work of Georges Hébert and Méthode Naturelle. And that gave me some framing for this. And over time, I dug deeply into work on play and saw that a lot of these ideas were emerging in the play literature and the ethology literature as well. And so then I started offering retreats where I was combining these ideas together. And through that, I started to see how people were longing for something that was, in some sense, more than just a personal heroic journey and more than the accomplishment of specific physical skills. But it was really about a deepening of connection to other people, to the natural environment, and to their own knowledge of self. And so that became kind of the main focus of my work. And I started to think about what I was doing as pursuing meaning through movement. And, as I was trying to figure that out and figure out why stories were so important, I encountered Jordan Peterson, and he was like, oh, the heroic story, why narrative is important, how it maps our world, how we map meaning into the world, all that stuff that I was kind of pushing to the edges of within my own practice of parkour and conceptualization of it was so beautifully laid out in his lectures and in his book. And so I was able to incorporate it. And then I discovered John Vervaeke, and he gave me an even more complete model in many ways of what meaning was, why we're having a crisis of meaning in our culture, and why we need embodied practices in order to overcome that. So I've been building that for the last 10 years. So it's a lot to say the whole story. So hopefully that's a good enough intro.
Okay, Rafe. So let's continue then. And if you can dive into sharing with me and with the audience what is Evolve, Move, Play, and what are the activities that you're cultivating. And we will take it from there.
Yeah, I guess the best way to describe it now would be a kind of ecology of practices aimed at self-transformation and development of virtue. It started with the basic idea that movement was fundamental for human beings, and that we were suffering because we had evolved for movement, and were living sedentary lives. And then that we actually evolved to learn movement primarily through play, and that our approach to movement as a culture doesn't respect the power of play as a pedagogical tool, as a educational tool. And so we're trying to get people to exercise, and they don't like it. They hate exercise. It's not working. So that kind of set of realizations came from having done parkour for many years. By the time I started this, I started Evolve Move Play in 2013, and I started parkour in 2005. And I had co-founded the first parkour gym on the West Coast, fourth in North America. And then I was reading a lot of play research and thinking a lot about the ancestral health paradigm. So that was kind of the influences that were bringing me together. And then over time, I got really interested in how I felt like why was I really practicing movement, right? Aside from, the justification that we evolved or anything else, it was like, it makes my life more meaningful. So then I started to ask the question of what about it makes my life more meaningful? How can a practice deliver that for you? And how would you orient your practice if that was actually what you're trying to achieve rather than some arbitrary set of skills? And so over time, we've come to this realization that fundamentally meaning in life is about your connection, about how connected you feel to fundamental aspects of reality. And through parkour, through martial arts, through various other movement modalities and connections, and then through contemplative and meditative practices, we've had this realization that fundamentally you have 5 connections to reality that determine your experience of being, which are the connections that are internal to the self. What are the relationships between your different physical structures, but also the emotional layer of the expression of that physical self and the cognitive layer? It's all interconnected. And then what is the relationship of the body mind to the physical environment, both as a space we can locomote ourselves through, and then also as a set of tools and objects that we can manipulate. And then what is our relationship to other living agents, both other human beings, but also animals and even plants? So that is and then the last thing is the transcendent, the powers and principalities, the collective intelligences that we live within. If we have a set of practices that allow us to have greater sophistication, greater error correction, greater connectedness across those dimensions, we believe that's going to be the most powerful way of cultivating highly virtuous self, virtuous communities, and deep meaning in life.
Wow, that's a lot. So, can you start unpacking a little bit more those 5 categories that you've mentioned, and what's your approach when it comes to the actual physical practice of these different dimensions?
Yeah. So I'm going to just give you a little history, actually, to start with. So I was inspired by Georges Hébert, founder of Méthode Naturelle. He talked about 10 fundamental physical abilities that anyone should have as part of their physical culture: walking, running, jumping, climbing, moving on all fours, swimming, balancing, lifting, throwing, and self-defense. And what I realized is you could subcategorize those into locomotion, manipulation, and combat. And then if you add dance in and shared work, then you end up with locomotion, manipulation, and interaction. So I started with those 3 elements.
Locomotion, manipulation, interaction. Okay.
Yeah. And then there was this aspect of how do you take care of your body, right? And so there was this kind of structural looking at like joint integrity stuff. And we saw that as kind of not necessarily in those other 3 categories. And it was Josef Frušek. I learned the term body to body practice from him. And that gave me a nice heuristic, because if there's a body to body practice, we can think of a body to environment practice like parkour, a body to object practice like swinging a kettlebell, and then a body to itself practice, which we call the body integration practice. And then we put those in relationship to other practices of self-development like mindfulness, connection to nature, and community. But what we've realized recently is that all those can be seen as, at first, accessible through movement. Before we can engage in a seated practice, there's actually this layer of the somatic and structural that has to be resolved. That's why the asana in yoga precede the meditative, even if the meditative is what's ultimately supposed to be the primary purpose. When we start developmentally, we can't separate emotion from physical expression. You don't feel sad as a baby, you cry. You don't feel angry, your face balls up, you clench your fists. So it was actually Ido Portal, listening to him on Andrew Huberman. I often disagree with Ido these days, but he described that a very similar sort of schema of practices, and he used the term structural and somatic for what we called body integration. And that really rang for me, because it was about this relationship between physical structure and then the somatic layer, and that as primary before we work on the mindfulness and contemplation layers. And if we think of that as sort of the movement as the physical root, right, in the body, and then we can quiet it down and inhibit it and do our mindfulness practices. And then you can think of locomotion and manipulation and mindfulness or somatic and structural actually as how we begin to access a deeper relationship to the natural world. We have to be able to move through the world. We have to be able to make fire, to track, to do all those things. Those are all expressions of these fundamental capacities that we start playing with balls and sticks and ropes as kids. And then the interactive practice is actually, we believe, the root of our capacity for philosophy and dialogue, right? One of the really striking ideas I've been working with over the last few years is that the Greek philosophy originates in the Greek gymnasia. Like Plato, who's considered the father of Western philosophy, was a wrestler, a very successful wrestler. And this is forgotten. But I believe that the dialogues of philosophy are actually emergent out of the practices of the gymnasia, which is racing, jumping, wrestling, preparing for a military drill, right? Boxing. And so that in the same sense, like before we learn to speak and interact with another nervous system through words, we're learning to use gesture and expression and push and pull as infants to attune to another nervous system, starting with nursing and then with rough and tumble play. So we think of these as the physical priors, the developmental priors behind all of the other self-development processes. They all actually root down into movement. And that's why we place movement as the foundation of self-development.
What about, just out of curiosity, body to bodies?
Yeah. I would just put that within the body to body practices, body to any interaction. So shared work or dance or, fighting one guy versus five guys. Those are all the expressions of how do you put your individual body mind in relationship to other body minds.
But do you have is it something that you, within the work that you do, because when I think about, or at least what I've a little bit seen from the work online, and when I think about martial practices and stuff like this, normally it happens with another person, no? But do you do some work that really involve group practices?
Yeah. We had we just finished our spring retreat, so we had a mosh pit in a tree. As part of what we did, we had a kind of imagination-led group brawl in the forest. There were people playing chase. There were people wrestling in different forms. There were, sort of theatrical stick fights happening. It was very interestingly contained. That was led by Aaron Cantor, who's
I actually know him.
Yeah. Aaron has a very unique capacity to kind of elicit interesting game scenarios.
Yeah, I think it's somehow, at least from my observation, one of the layers that I've encountered the least within what is so-called the movement culture. Like there's a lot of emphasis on solo work, on partner work, but I see that group work is hardly being addressed. Although I think that, again, because I'm coming from dance, it's something that is, and also from basketball as a young kid. So kind of the notion of how to exist within a group is very fundamental to what I do. But in my work, I really differentiate that because I think that there is something very fundamentally different that happens when I communicate with one person and then when the number grows, and that at a certain point, like let's say if I move with 13 or 16 people, it doesn't really matter, but there is a big difference than if I move between 2 people or 3 people. That's kind of a big step.
I have a sense that I haven't thought so much about group choreography, though I suppose I have a little bit, because we're thinking a lot about community and the importance of community and what actually creates a sense of bond between people. And so shared rhythmic movement with music is an extraordinarily powerful path towards sort of attuning a group of nervous systems together. And if you want to catalyze a group identity, it's a really, really powerful tool. It can be very dangerous too, right? It's something you can use to build a cult if you're unscrupulous with it. But it's a hunger that human beings have. I think Jamie Wheel talks about it as communitas. Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheel talk about the communitas as one of these fundamental altered states that we're seeking in Recapture the Rapture. I haven't read that book, but that's my understanding. Now, I have thought I think that there's an interesting sort of um, skepticism towards team sport within the movement culture community and within parkour. I think that there's a couple of reasons for that. I think that team sport is the professionalization of team sport has been traumatic for many individuals for good reason, right? Uh, you know, essentially, like play research shows that if you're not successful about 30% of the time, you will cease being interested in a particular form of play. So children will inherently will handicap play and renegotiate play to make sure that everybody wants to stay in the game because they want to sustain their capacity to have play relationships with each other. When we take kids and we put them in organized soccer, what we do is we make winning the primary metric rather than the enjoyment of the individuals, which is what kids are focused on. And what happens is there's always some subset of kids who aren't sufficiently successful to sustain motivation. And so what we're actually doing is kind of punishing the play circuitry out of those kids as they go through these selective PE and team sports systems. So that's a big problem with the team sports system. The other thing about team sports is that they're very biased towards body size, right? So bigger people just have a big advantage in most of the team sports that we play. So I think that a lot of people who come into movement culture or parkour, they were burned out by the team sport situation or never felt welcome in it or didn't have the psyche that wanted to like be in group flow as much. And so they're quite negative towards team sport.
Yeah, and I guess also the fact that the objective is always so concrete about, like there's game, there's rule, and kind of winning is the point. It kind of drives the attention away from just observing the experience of what does it mean to be a part of a movement flow in the situation. I don't know, for me, the best example maybe is contact improvisation jam for that kind of interesting dynamic between being a part and being oneself. And I think it kind of, connect to some stuff that I've heard you speak about, the kind of the difference between unification and multiplication. And like in a contact jam, the reason I think why it serves as an amazing laboratory for that is because you gave the example of putting people under a certain, let's say, beat and then moving together as a way to kind of attune the nervous system. And that's very, very, as you said, easy to achieve. But in that process, it's very also easy to kind of lose the identity of the self completely, and that's maybe also the risk of, as you said, that you can use it kind of for malevolent purposes. But in a contact jam, there is a tension there that existing as a whole unit is very important in order to create the group feeling. So it's really not possible to completely dissolve the individual in while you're attempting to unify kind of a bigger brain body, a bigger brain, group brain. And I don't know, do you have some experience with contact improvisation?
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. I have never really been part of a contact community or ecstatic dance community. I've trained with first Yuri Yaziv and then Tom Wexler and Josef Rusik and Aaron Cantor, right? And so through them, we have layered in a lot of conceptual pieces from contact into our approach to roughhousing. And we use a lot of pieces from contact. The ecstatic dance community or the contact dance community often has a kind of ethical framework that I'm not super comfortable with.
Thumb up for that.
And so I'm always like cautious when I'm teaching people workshops. They come, they experience this rough and tumble stuff. They experience the connection, the creativity. They're really excited about it. I'm like, one source you can find something like this in is your local contact community. But you have to be aware that there's a lot of leaky sexual energy in contact communities, unfortunately. And there's a lot of, that's been my perception.
No, that's a very fair argument. And, I'm coming from, I started my dance journey within the contact improvisation world. And then later I picked up contemporary dance. And then I kind of went to the route of going into professional dance education. yeah, and contact improvisation, and that's maybe one of the kind of hardest thing about it, is that there's so many beautiful gems to harvest from there, but at the same time, there's a lot of problematic thing. And what you've mentioned, I think, is maybe in the core of it, that there's like a certain set of values that are very present within the practice that sometimes really put the attention somewhere else. But I think I just never came across a physical space that enabled that kind of exploration, like contact improvisation jam, because again, in most spaces there is a certain well-defined rules of engagement, and in order to coordinate a big amount of people, you need to make more and more rules. So you need to unify the space more and more. And in contact improvisation, that's part of the negotiation, and that's very interesting. I think like that in order to give birth to this group brain without completely feeling yourself losing any self-importance, the act of negotiation about the rule is somehow present in the space. And that's something that, again, for me is that's maybe the main thing to take from there when I think about group work. And that's something I'm trying to encourage other people to not give up on that word, because I think there's really interesting point. But it's true that like you bring in the point that like the values of in the environment that you practice are really influencing the practice itself. And in a way, it also led me to ask you, how do you handle the tension that within your work, you have your own set of values? Why do you do what you do? And you take inspiration from stuff like martial art, like dance, etc. But in order to practice them in your own environment, I can assume that there is a certain extraction of the material from the environment where it's typically emerging, and then there is a certain tension with the different values that you will look at it. And I also do the same in my own work, and sometimes I introduce dancers to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. But I always tell everybody I work like that's not really Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. You need to go to the gym. You need to have some people smashing you on the mat before you can. And not in a friendly way that is exploring the movement, but that somebody will really try to strangle you in order to know what Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. So how do you handle this movement from being specialist into being generalist, and this kind of extraction of the content? If it's clear what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. I think the movement generalist, this is a fundamental problem for any kind of approach to movement generalism, which is that we're going to be taking pieces from other things. And then whenever you take a piece from something, there's a risk that what you're taking doesn't have the same meaning when it's decontextualized. And sometimes I think that we as movement generalists are taking the wrong pieces. But, so my work has been informed by Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I teach people games and drills that come from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and American wrestling. And I tell them that I'm trying to build their capacity to play well, right? Which will donate across the sort of all these different potential spaces. I am not trying to be the best technical jiu-jitsu coach. If they want to truly understand the mechanical aspects of jiu-jitsu and the strategic and tactical aspects of jiu-jitsu, they should be looking at coaches like John Danaher and Firas Zahabi and Matt Thornton, right? And so I'm always kind of guiding people back to that. I also take influence from self-defense thinkers, like, again, Matt Thornton or Rory Miller, Steve Morris. And I will say, here's where we're playing with this piece. And this is as far as our kind of scope of practice is going to take you with that. And if this is something that's really important to you, I'm going to refer you back to those teachers. With one of the interesting ones for me is capoeira, right? I think that to a very significant degree, at least the early iterations of capoeira, of movement culture, are mostly capoeira divorced from the game. It's capoeira divorced from the game combined with gymnastic strength techniques, a little bit of Russian martial arts, and some hand balancing. That's like the, movement culture beta or movement culture 1.0. Now, what's interesting to me is that in a lot of ways, capoeira is a more complete culture than movement culture is, because it has song, it has folklore, it has music, and it has a live game dynamics.
Yeah, and it has long history. Yeah.
Yeah, it has long history. So it has wonderful things, right? The aliveness component, if you've been following my work, you know how much I prize aliveness. And I think when you take all the pretty Instagram worthy aspects of capoeira and you practice them extracted from the aliveness of the game, you're actually missing out on the most important nourishment for the general movement capacity of the athlete. And that having those things in relationship to song, to rhythm, to history and folklore is actually really deeply rich. And just decontextualizing it is risky, but I do still decontextualize it, right? I use lots of capoeira stuff.
Yeah, it's unavoidable. No, I guess it's unavoidable because that's kind of inspiration. No, like you get inspired from stuff, and that's unavoidable. But and I don't know, I'm still struggling with that problem because I feel like that, and again, maybe my reference to that kind of grappling with this issue is the 4-quadrant model that I took from Ken Wilber, and I don't know if you're aware of his work, or have you heard?
I am aware of his work. I knew what the 4-quadrant model is at some point, but at the moment I'm struggling. It's like subjective, intersubjective.
Yeah, so you have exactly, you have internal subjective, external individual interior, which is the subjective spaces. You have individual exterior, the objective, the behavior. Then you have the same thing for the collective, which the interior will be the culture, meaning, stories, and the exterior will be the structures. And that's exactly the point. And capoeira maybe is a great example, because if I just take a certain moves, I don't know, I do some floero moves solo, and then I combine them with a planche or whatever, my physical experience, which is the interior, doesn't have anything to do with capoeira. I'm just doing some moves, but I'm not doing anything that has to do with capoeira. I'm not listening to capoeira music. I'm not interacting with another person standing inside a circle while some people clapping to me, and maybe I'm doing it in a gym because that's how my context is, and I'm not doing it on the street. So like the whole so on the level of the spaces and the culture and my own experience, I'm not doing capoeira. The only thing that might resemble is certain movement that my body is passing through. And then it's like, it's not divorced. It's like, it's you cannot even say that it's the same thing. And again, I'm not saying that it's wrong to take inspiration, but it's a tricky thing, I think, because like I'm also interested in introducing people that I work with to the different interests that I have. And again, I'm mainly a dancer, but I also do 6 years of Jiu Jitsu, and I love it. And I think it's great practice. But then I always feel like that there is something on one hand beautiful about giving the taste and, like, as you said, like opening the inspiration, but then it's like, how to deal with the issue that it's really, really a different experience because it's affected by the rest of the thing. And I don't know, actually, I feel like the best thing for me is kind of to avoid it than dealing with that problem. But I don't know, what do you see that happens actually with the actual work that you do? Like when people do go through this, let's say, grappling in a different environment, like, and the experience of doing it also in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gym. What's the differences that you noticed?
Yeah, I just was grappling with an advanced Jiu-Jitsu practitioner as a student of Eddie Bravo's in the woods, and he was talking about how just like his experience of putting his pivot points down on his hips and everything, like there's these subtle differences in how the ground interacts with it and how to move was different. So it's a fascinating experience. I want to create more adaptive people in general. So when I took my capoeira school that I was training in out into nature to train, and they were really struggling to sustain their Jenga on grass, right? Their feet slipping all over the place. They're so conditioned to the ground inside the gym that they can't adapt, and they're not recognizing it. So I'm really about getting people to adapt. These containers, these traditional packages of arts that have been passed down to us, my philosophy has generally been to try to credit them as much as possible, while also exploring the difference between the why of what we're doing versus the why of that practice. And also, you know, like we said with contact improv, it's like, hey, this is a great practice to pick pieces up from. And also there's some things that you need to be aware of that are going to enter that community. And it's the same with, right? You know, there's a
Yeah.
lot of history about ethical behavior in the back of communities. Um, it comes from street culture. It comes from, you know, this idea of mandrajo, right? That's not necessarily an archetype you want to completely embody. You might want a piece of it, but might want to be careful with how much you're bringing that into yourself.
Hmm.
It might not be adaptive in a different context from the Brazilian favela, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
100%.
so yeah, and then the same thing like with jujitsu, I tell people like, I don't think it's a great idea actually, pedagogically, to take someone who, uh, you know, it's interesting because the better jujitsu schools, they have some way of addressing this. But if you go into jujitsu, a lot of times you're going to be go into a class, do a series of drills, do a warm up, slap hands with someone you've never met, and try to, you know, put each other in a position to break your joint or strangle each other without ever getting to know that person on a deeper level. And I don't actually think that's a great model for skill acquisition. I think that attending to the quality of the player relationship is really important. And I think a lot of jiu-jitsu guys are carrying injuries that they didn't need to carry because the level of rapport and effective gameplay was not addressed as a part of the pedagogy, that it was so focused on winning matches and the mechanical aspects of it.
Mm.
That how to play so that we both scale up skill effectively, right? I mean, jiu-jitsu guys know this on some level. They talk about slow rolling, you know, guys who have been in it, who are, you know, black belts, they understand how to kind of like find partners who you meld with well. There's a lot of machismo and there's a lot of like pushing through and a lot of, you know, maybe we'll just, if someone's a spaz, we're just going to hurt him until he stops being a spaz. Right.
Yeah, yeah. At the end, I think it's just like the way I experience it. It's like that. It immediately points to the individual whys behind the practice, and I can speak about my own experience in that regard. That I'm a very playful person, so when I go to do jiu-jitsu, for me, winning is not the most important. I enjoy doing beautiful things, even if I lose at the end. so like I appreciate beautiful transitions, interesting quality of connection with my partner, but I'm horrible in competitions because like that confronts me with something that I'm not really, that's not in my why. My why is not how can I razor focus on destroying another individual right now when I choose to. So that's not my why, to cultivate that kind of, serious, aggressive killer mentality. And that's something that translates much better in competition. And in a way, because I'm kind of avoiding that, my jiu-jitsu journey is kind of departed from a certain very fundamental aspect of martial art, which is the ability to confront, somebody who's aggressive towards you. But yeah, it's and I think in general, it's something that I'm not sure how much in those, and maybe that's the main thing that I appreciate about people like you, and maybe you also mentioned Tom, who is a close friend, people that really think a lot about their whys, that then there's a much deeper discourse for the practitioner to question themselves into the practice. When you go to a jiu-jitsu gym, you're just kind of in a funnel of like, go there, and then there's not so many people who have the capacity and the possibility to ask those questions because they just suck on what is happening in the space. But what is your deepest why for yourself? Because you've mentioned, I want to help people to become more adaptive, but is that the main thing that drives you personally to keep working with your body? I mean,
Yeah,
it's been many years, I guess, and you're also a father. There's many interests in life. So like, what keeps nourishing it after all these years for yourself?
I think I can give you the philosophical answer, but I'm trying to feel the embodied answer. The embodied is just something like it feels really good, right? Like if like I went to
I appreciate that you came with that answer. That's
yeah.
not just went directly to the.
I so I've had an interesting couple of years. I've actually had some kind of underlying inflammatory condition probably for like a decade that it turns out was related to mold exposure. And so
What?
mold exposure.
Hmm.
So I've been having chronic fatigue and gut health issues for years, for a decade, right? And between that and the stresses of raising a young family and entrepreneurialism, like my health has kind of started to collapse a little bit at times, and the pandemic like just really crushed me with work and everything else, and so I came out of it, and I got to go to Hawaii to visit a friend, and I like basically so 2020 I kind of came out of the worst of it and like went through a really intense training program to sort of try to get myself back up, but I still didn't have the health to really support what I was doing. And so once the season of teaching seminars came around in 2020, like everything just fell off a cliff. It's like I went from jumping 9 feet to 8.5 feet, 27 inches to 22 inches. Everything is just, my weight's going up 20 pounds. And so I got to the end of that, and I went to Hawaii to visit my friend, and I jumped over a tree branch and landed on a root and tore my ankle up really bad.
Oh, I think I've seen a video of a video of you doing it, of this accident. No?
So I've sprained my ankle lots of times. That ankle, that was October of 2021, and I still have some limitations in that ankle from that injury.
Hmm.
I've sprained my ankle like 8 times on each ankle severely, but never has it been that long to recover. So then a year later, basically, I sprained the other ankle. So anyways, I've been working myself back into my own, expectation of fitness, and just recently, like I'm really starting to feel like myself. Like on Tuesday, I dunked a basketball on a 10-foot rim for the first time since 2018. It was an alley-oop, so I still got to be able to take the ball up myself. But, I was at 9.4. I was dunking at 9.4 back in November when I started this quest. So it's a pretty good progression. I'm over a 30-inch vertical again, and I went out to train Saturday before last at Volunteer Park, which is like the amazing trees, and I was just flying through these trees again, and it just feels really cool. It feels really cool to be able to do it. It feels amazing. Like for me, like dunking a basketball feels awesome. That's exciting, but when I do some new movement sequence or just some really powerful, beautiful movement sequence in a tree or in a beautiful creek, on like sliding down waterfalls and stuff, like it makes me feel alive and present and in the moment, and this extraordinary sense of joy. And I get a similar expression, like I got to match myself against a similarly sized, Jiu Jitsu athlete, and like if I'm smashing and holding him down and he can't get up, it's like, feel really good. Land a spinning back kick and curl somebody up, like feel good. So there's an embodied element that just something in my body just tells me yes to these things. Now the way that I approach them though has changed over the years, because when I was in my 20s, I was chasing performance. I wanted to be an elite athlete. I wanted to compete in parkour and win parkour competitions. And I went and I competed at American Ninja Warrior, and I did really well, coming 9 months after an Achilles tendon tear. And that was pretty enjoyable. But as I competed, I found that I was getting a lot of anxiety from competition. I didn't really enjoy it. And the things that I needed to do to be successful competitively took me away from time spent training in nature. I realized that I cared much more about training in nature. There's something about the connection and the beauty of what I did in nature that was really meaningful to me. And so I started thinking about, that question of why a lot. And I came to the idea that there's something meaningful about it. Well, it's like, what kind of meaning do I want to be oriented to? And that's the layers of connections that I've talked about. But one way that I like to think about it is that, and this is a Jordan Peterson idea, but you can imagine that that there's many different little local games that you play in your life, right? It's like you have the game of being the stud basketball guy in your local town, right? That could be a game, right? Or you're playing a game of lifting weights at the local gym, right? It's like if you go in and you start lifting weights and you do it for a long time, for 12 months a year, like you're probably going to be pretty strong compared to a lot of people. And then you're going to get respect from other people who are also dedicated. And then you get to be part of the community. And now you're kind of excelling in this little space, and people will come up and praise you like, dude, you're looking swole. And that feels good, right? Now you can often choose to try to win at the local level in ways that are actually negatively impactful in other games. So you get really excited about everyone telling you you're looking swole at the gym, and you all of a sudden your gains start tapering off. You're past the newbie gains. People aren't noticing that your body's changing, and that your buddy Eric is now on Anavar and Test, and it's like, well, he's making gains, he's getting praise. I'm gonna jump on the same train, right? But now your sex drive's out of control, and it's making you attracted to situations that are outside the scope of your relationship. So now you're failing at the relationship game, so that you can get more swole in the lifting weights game. So if you think about life as a meta game, it's the game that is the set of all games. We want to play each local game in such a way that it's the best training grounds for the metagame that we can. And so what we're ultimately looking for in the metagame is something like wisdom and personal virtue. So that's the philosophical side of what I'm doing. Like, the joy brings me in, but I'm able to sustain and know that it's worth continuing to pursue this joy, because if I approach it right, it can make me a better person as a father, as a husband, as a son, as a member of my community. It can help me overcome fear. It can help me understand myself. It can help me do all those things. And that's why those 5 layers are all vital and important to me.
Okay, I'm gonna push back, not because intuitively I'm with you.
Yeah, I get it.
Because I also feel this very intuitive connection. I started dancing pretty late. I was playing basketball then, but then I started later with this kind of obsession to study movement. So if I would just follow my physical urges, I would all the time train and abandon the other responsibilities that I have. So I get the intuitive connection. And when I think about kind of the more philosophical framework, something that I want to ask and to kind of push a little bit into is, I can really understand why training movement can, let's say, play an important role in character building, but it still feels for me kind of divorced from wisdom, because otherwise, if it would be coupled with wisdom, then we wouldn't see pathological behavior in the movement world, which is obviously not the case. So how do you know that what you're doing actually makes you a better person? And I listened to one of your podcast conversation with I think again Jonathan Piaget. Did I say his name correct?
Piaget, yeah.
Yeah, and you said something that kind of struck me very strong. You said something that for you, being in I wrote it down, so I think I'm saying it correctly. Being in relation to reality, such that I'm acting from love that wants to bring good into being, and that's kind of your guiding compass.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a very open thing, and that's something that I'm really struggling myself, and it kind of also made me hold back for many years from actually building any structure, because I kept asking myself, why would I not build another pathological structure in the world? Because I'm aware that I have a bit of narcissistic tendencies and some other not well maintained qualities as a human. But on the other hand, I also felt, but movement and like really helps me to feel good and to be sensitive to others. But still, I can totally see it at the same time. And it also happened in my life that I fucked up other games in order to improve the movement game. So how do you actually know for yourself, and what are the tools or systems or checks and balances that you have around yourself as an individual in your practice, in your business, in order to kind of address that really fundamental thing, which is like, am I actually becoming more wise? Am I actually becoming a better person in the world? Because that's a very, very complex thing to even imagine that we are doing, no? Or like, what's your take about that? If you enjoyed the conversation so far and found it meaningful, please consider to share the episode with others and to click the like button. These small actions might seem meaningless, but they are the fuel that helps the podcast project to move forward. Your attention and time is highly valued, and we would love to hear more about the insights you might have from listening to this episode. And please consider to subscribe to the channel to be notified for all future uploads.
John Vervaeke is one of my big mentors. He talks about the idea that, there's a point at which he was really doing Tai Chi religiously, right? And he means that in the sense of like all the time, rigorously, intensely, and also in the sense of like it was a religious, spiritual practice for him. And people started reporting back to him, John, you seem more balanced in the way that you think. John, you seem calmer. John, you seem more fluid, right? John came out to do Return to Source with us, and he said, like, afterwards, you could feel his brain able to make connections and navigate through certain types of intellectual spaces better than he believed in reference to what we were doing. So there's some degree, we can, in some sense, like set up metrics that are internal, right? Like, for instance, I aspire to be somebody who's primarily sexually interested in my wife, right? And I can just notice whether I'm feeling urges towards other women or not, right? And I was like, well, what's changing in me that's driving me in the direction that I want to go? And then we always need to look at like who we are as socially negotiated. So one of the big problems that happens is with gurus is that they become the source of authority. And then then all their behavior is justifiable because they're the authority. So you want to have people who are empowered around you to give you real feedback. And then you want to pay attention to that feedback. So I have people in my life who've been working with me and coaching with me and training with me for close to a decade. And those people tell me that in these areas, you're doing a lot better, right? I remember this aspect of you, and it's nice to see that you've overcome this. And they'll also tell me like, hey, you're fucking up in the way that you always fuck up. Let's rein it in there. So I think your family, it's hard. Families can be hard because they can have a hard time seeing you for who you are and not who you were, especially when we no longer live regularly with our families. So you can imagine if you spent like 10,000 hours with your mom between say 10 and 15, and then you spend like 1,000 hours with her between 15 and 25, like she just doesn't have the same model of you. Like she's relying on that older model. And so she's not going to update as well. And so sometimes that can be diluting and very disalienating to rely on that model. But ultimately, you want to be working to have people you're very deeply connected with who can reflect back on you if you are changing the directions that you would like to change. Right? So my wife knows who I'm aspiring to be. And we've worked on it. It's been a struggle actually within the last year, but we've worked on getting her to feel like she has the freedom to give me the feedback that I need to improve as a partner for her. And so that is how I judge myself, right? Is by having good open feedback systems with people who I have close, connected, intimate relationships with. And am I actually moving in the direction of being somebody who can seek truth, serve love, and respect the mystery of being?
Yeah, I'm married to a bullshit detector, so that's that's a good start. That's a good starting point. Yeah, but but this is exactly like I think that for myself, I also kind of realized that this is something that you need to outsource to others. You cannot rely on your own intuition. That's maybe for me kind of maturing is kind of involve understanding where are the areas that your intuition is completely wrong and not relying on it anymore. But that's kind of but that understanding for me kind of started to open again the question. So what is it about movement then? Because I do feel that, like, again, the most important moment in my life that helped me to kind of, let's say, get the intuition, that I'm getting better, were actually happening as a result of people referring to how I behave independent of their likes or dislike to the same activities that I do. And what I also find problematic is that because, we are operating also as entrepreneurs and within a certain market dynamics that in order to succeed, you also need to behave in a certain way. Maybe it's, again, I'm generalizing. You can be a good person and succeed. It's not that I'm saying that you have to be an asshole, but when the more you succeed, the more people want stuff from you. So then, like, the kind of advices that you get are not coupled from other people's interest. And in order to create a structure that is really free from interest, it's kind of, I think, impossible maybe to do something like that. So then what I find for myself is that, like, from the community of my students, even though I try to exemplify that I'm open to critique. So if somebody criticizes me during class, I will kind of say, hey, great. And I will not put them down so people know that's a good thing to do in my class. But nevertheless, I know that they will not be able to really serve as the deepest mirrors for myself. So then so then it makes me feel a little bit as if I will not find my salvation within the movement environment, but it actually the relationship that I build around my life in other structure can see me in a way that is more reflective, because, again, and I guess that maybe it's also in your case, it's coupled to our livelihood, and then it's very difficult to be extremely transparent with every individual that come. Everybody who wants to study in the movement lab, I cannot start and say, hey, I just want you to know that I'm dealing with this addiction, and this is like, please be aware of all my shadows that you can you need to kind of also be attractive, and that's to some extent. So I don't know, what kind of relationship do you have with your students and people who are following your work for many years?
So I want to split two. I feel like there's two things that you're talking about that I want to address. One is what specifically about movement works or doesn't work.
Yeah.
And then two, I think related to that, how do you set up, or what is the role of different communities in informing you? And what is the dangers involved with being a leader of a community?
Yeah.
So when it comes to movement, like I said, I think that movement is the most fundamental place in self-development, but I think that every tool of self-development is also potentially a trap.
Okay.
So I give this example that I believe that parkour is the most profound place to study your relationship to fear of any practice, even more than martial arts. Right? Like for me, stepping up to a actual death-defying jump, right, or a very dangerous jump, that's like stepping into the ring, right?
That's like
stepping into the ring, like stepping into an actual fight. Right? Now, once you're in the fight, that's like being in the jump, right? You're not you're not preparing mentally. You're not walking through it. The online aspect of it kind of makes it hard to actually experience the fear and really deal with it in the same way. Now, a parkour athlete can go out and do 30 jumps, but you're not going to step into the ring 30 times in a day. So there's a way in which you can study fear more deeply. I think there's things within martial arts that elicit fear differently than the fears that you experience in parkour, and they're both powerful. But for me, parkour is the most powerful way to deal with fear as a study. Now, so you can cultivate courage through parkour, maybe better than any other modality. But here's the thing. You have to actually have an intention to express it in the rest of your life. And you have to make the attempt to show up the same way that you show up for a jump in the rest of your life. And there's a thing that we can do, which is we can get into this trap of saying, I know that I'm courageous because I can do this jump, but I'm still too afraid to talk to my wife about that thing that conflict that we're having that I'm not telling her about. And so when I'm confronted by the fact that I'm a coward in my relationship, what I'm going to do is just go do some jumps to tell myself that I'm brave.
Yeah,
right?
And also bravery is still can be decoupled from wisdom.
Oh yeah,
you can be brave and very horrible.
Brave and dumb, and you can be brave and So it's one virtue. It's not wisdom on its own. So there's, I've seen lots of people who have done pretty bad damage to themselves, honestly, using Vipassana practices, deaden themselves emotionally, or become people do a lot of people who do somatics practices. They're very soft and they're not very capable of maintaining, it's like put them on a floor on the ground and they have wonderful emotional, sensitivity to what's going on in their skin, but they're not strong enough. They're not courageous enough to actually be able to sustain that level of sensitivity when under the pressure of the world. So it's like you need both. So I don't think that movement practice is sufficient on its own. I think we need to integrate all of those 5 layers. That's my answer about it. Is movement can be a diluting path if it's like one stool or one leg of a stool, right? It's like you build the best leg of a stool. It's still unstable as a way to craft your own capacity for wisdom. Now, the second question was, I guess I'll go to the leadership question. This is something I'm thinking about a lot right now, right? Like I was just featured on Jordan Peterson. That's 450,000 people who saw me on the YouTube, and probably who knows how many on this podcast. So it might be 1 million people who were exposed. You
can add soon another 200.
There you go. It makes all the difference. Now, we just released a little video of my son that has over 1 million views on Instagram. Which is crazy because I don't think my channel before that had a total of 1 million views.
Okay.
And I look at some of the dynamics that I see around Jordan. I look at the dynamics that I see around celebrity in general, and it's quite concerning to me, right? Because through working with John, I've become aware of the idea of collective intelligence, right? That that there are emergent properties to networks of minds. Now, we also run avatars of people's minds in our minds. So you can think to yourself, what would my wife say about this? And you'll probably get an answer that's not that far from what she would say. Maybe it'll be wrong, but you have a rough approximation of her running around in your head. What I'm considering and thinking about a lot is that celebrity is basically like releasing an avatar of your mind into thousands of other minds. And since our identity we rely on other people for our identity, what gets reflected back to you can be incredibly diluting, right? It can be incredibly disorienting. I think that's why so many celebrities have such horrible mental health, and rely so much on substances, because they have no idea who they are. Because it's impossible for them not to be influenced by the image that all these other people have of them. So even in your local community, right? If you're the most skillful person or the most charismatic person, there's going to be an asymmetry of attention, right? You're going to be very important in the minds of a lot of people, many of whom are going to be less important in your mind.
Yeah.
Right? Not because you're an asshole, but because there's an asymmetry of attention.
Yeah.
You can't, you just can't you can't be close friends. I can't be close friends with 1 million people.
Yeah, you're on the good side of the Pareto distribution of attention in that case.
Exactly. Well, yeah.
If attention is what you want.
Yeah, if attention is what you want. I don't know. You're on one side of it, but it's a very dangerous thing, actually, right? There's an advantage to it, right? Gaining attention is a way to spread a message, right? If you have something valuable to say, then you want asymmetrical attention, one to many. If it's obviously a way to become financially successful, but it exposes you to a kind of capture by other people's image of you, and also, and like living in a persona that may not really reflect the best version of you.
Yeah, and also another thing that maybe is less common in the parkour world, because for whatever reason, but in the dance world, I think it's very present, that you see that very often the type of people that are attracted to being on stage, being on the center of attention, are normally not the type of personalities that would be the most wise. And for many reasons, but I would even maybe argue that there is a certain connection between the desire to be in the center of attention and this lack of wisdom, and why my wife, for example, she's a person that doesn't want to be in the center of attention, and she thinks very carefully before she speaks, and when she speaks, I think she typically says very smart and precise thing, and I think that's exactly the tension that I'm experiencing, that my desire to get a wider audience for the message that I believe in is not decoupled from certain, shadow work that I need to do.
Yeah.
And then there's the tension between the great message that I do authentically believe in, which is, hey, just come and do this experience, because there is something transformative about the experience that is not connected to me. You just need to experience that. But because my practice is not detached from my own values, the energy that I cultivate, and on this level on these 4 quadrants and how it spreads, then it's not decoupled from my own shadows and my own shortcoming. And then like the desire to amplify my message sometimes is being driven by those less positive aspects of myself. And I feel that the more I'm kind of settling, the more I'm calming that down, I become a better person. But then it's not so easy to have the same energy to push yourself out there into the world, no? And I think Jordan Peterson is an interesting example, because I do believe, from listening to a lot of his online content, that what made him come to public attention was not his desire for attention. Mm. And that's a very different example, as you said, of somebody who's like, I don't know, Leonardo DiCaprio, who went to pursue an acting career. And that's a very tricky, for me, that's a very tricky thing. I don't know. It's not that easy for me to solve that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I see some tensions in Jordan that look a little bit like shadows to me. And I have a lot of empathy for them, because I feel like I've shared a lot of them, right? Like, I've seen that Jordan, at least for a period of time, was really reaching up towards speaking to people, like Matthew McConaughey, like that, like reaching for the people who had the power to really push him out, and not so much reconnecting down to, say, a John Vervaeke, who has a much smaller platform, but maybe has a lot more to offer Jordan in a conversation.
Yeah.
And my sense is that Jordan was someone who was extraordinarily accomplished, who had a great deal to say, who deserved to be far, far more famous intellectually than he was when he exploded. And then he became famous for something that, while important, was not that central to his message.
Yeah.
And so there's a tension there. And like for me, I have my shadow around having been a kid who was told that I was special, right? From the time I was 2 or 3 years old, right? I was supposed to be some kind of spiritual leader, right? From the time I'm tiny, and then at the same time I had dyslexia and ADHD and was, not progressing in school. And then, my dad was neglecting me because he couldn't watch me go through the same traumas that he did. So like my whole life, it's like, I want people to see that I really do have something to say, and like, I want to feel loved, right? Who doesn't want to feel loved, right? Like I was homeschooled. So like at a certain point, like all my friends were more interested in the friends that they were seeing at school. And I was kind of losing my friends, and I had to work really hard to try and sustain friendships. Mm. And so there's always been a sense of this asymmetry of like, I'm always reaching out to try to create community and friendships, and I'm not feeling like I'm reached back to the same degree. Or I had that for many years. And so that's a shadow in me. And so that reaching to get that platform and be seen, like I see in myself that there's a shadow that drives that to a significant degree. Mm-hmm. And it's weird because now that I'm at the point where I feel like that kind of platform is arriving for me, now I'm much more like, oh, do I have to do it this way? Right? Because all the work has made me able to integrate those shadows a little bit more, able to see it, able to see that like, the 100,000 likes on Instagram are just way less important than a genuine smile from my wife. Hmm. But it's very, very easy it's very easy for your attention to be captured by the dynamics of something like social media and by these asymmetries of attention in ways that take you away from openness and connectedness in the moment to your wife, your children, your training partners. That's definitely something that I'm really thinking a lot about, because I have an opportunity to go out and get my message out there in front of really large audiences. And that's also a huge financial opportunity. And so there's a lot of reasons to take those opportunities. And at the same time, they invite these asymmetries of attention that are potentially very disorienting for me in being able to continue to show up in the way that I want to for the most important people in my life. Mm.
Yeah, and maybe the one interesting framework that I've been trying to adapt into my thinking is from Daniel Schmachtenberger, mm-hmm. who is talking about first, second, third, fourth order effect of whatever you're doing, and how that normally when we have a good motivation to do something in the world, we tend to be very aware of the first order of effect, but we are normally completely blind to what happened down the stream with whatever we are doing. And that's something that I've been trying to really think, like, what is the right way to implement it on a small scale? Because, again, the work that I do is maybe significant to a certain number of people in Vienna, but I'm not trying to claim that I do anything that influential in the world. But still, I think it's something that is interesting to start to grapple with and to understand in whatever scale that you're working. And I can imagine that, again, there is a certain that the further you are out in the Pareto distribution of attention, the harder it is to actually understand those things because of the magnitude of your effect. And that's a very serious problem to deal if we are talking about orienting towards doing good in the world. Oh,
Yeah. Just the volume of potential people that you could be interacting with becomes problematic, right? Because what is your search function to get yourself to the best, right? One very easy search function once you reach a high enough sort of Pareto distribution is just other people in the same Pareto distribution. But that's not, there's some meritocracy in that, but it can be very, very misleading, right? Can take you away from a lot of the people who have the most attention don't have the most attention because they actually have something valuable to say. A lot of people who have something valuable to say aren't necessarily seeking attention, right? Like, I'll just throw some attention in this direction, but I think Simon Tacker is one of the most brilliant coaches in the movement industry. And whenever people compare me, like I'll be added to lists of like people's favorite movement thinkers all the time. It's always Ido Portal, Rafe Kelly, Erwin LaCour, maybe Josef Rusek, right? Simon's never on that list, right? But for me, like Josef and Simon are very high on the list. But Simon's not getting the recognition, right? But he doesn't want it. But if I'm only going to talk to the people who are at the same sort of Pareto distribution as me, then I'm not going to be reaching out to someone like Simon. So when I see like Jordan reaching out to Jonathan Pajot, reaching out to John Vervaeke, reaching out to me, that's really, really encouraging, right?
yeah, yeah, for sure. Because you have to because I guess, and that's maybe not so different to intellectual endeavors and to physical endeavors, that you have to go to the margins of your practice in order to be able to, discover something new. And the moment you're accessing people that are operating in the same conditions as you are, they are also facing the same limitations. So I guess somebody like John Vervaeke, who has a very small platform, is not facing such public scrutiny like Jordan Peterson, so he can be much more free with the way he thinks and expresses himself online. And that's enabled some maybe different quality of discourse to develop in the same way that, I don't know, my Brazilian Jiu Jitsu coach is for sure a complete unknown person in the world, but he's an amazing person who works as a social worker with kids, and he's such an interesting character that I'm learning so many things from him that are not connected directly to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that are very valuable for me. And if I will go and I train with John Danaher, so there's no chance I'm going to talk to him about his, I don't know, things that are not directly in relation to the physical practice. So there's a certain, give and take in that regard. Yeah, but I think that the desire to amplify, I mean, at least in my in how I try to do it for myself, and it seems for me that you're also thinking like this, is that it should never be decoupled from those fundamental questions. Like, so if I'm looking for more attention, if I'm trying to grow my structure, growth should not be a value in and of itself, but it should serve something. And the moment that growth is just the driving force, then there are some problems with that.
Yeah, I would say 2 years ago, like I wanted the recognition still, just on an internal level. Like I still felt a hunger for it that was driving me. And now I feel very leery of it, but somehow I feel like I've played this game long enough that I'm in a position to have some impacts that I think are really worthwhile, and that it's worth me staying in this, even though it's actually, even though I can see a danger in it that I didn't recognize before.
Yeah, maybe it will be good for me to invite you again in a year and see what is the sense making you've done in relation to being in a different place on the curve of attention. Hey, Rafe, it's already an hour and 15 minutes, and we should wrap it soon because I know also you have your time limitation. But I do want to also give you some time to share with people who are listening, if they're interested in your work and they want to see what you're doing, kind of how to get you, what are the public spaces that people can connect to your work, and what are you offering right now? So
Yeah, absolutely. So we have kind of 3 core products. We have our retreats, which are 5 or 8 days. So we do spring 5 days, July 8 days, and September is 5 days. So those are sold out for this year, but people can go on our website and get on a wait list for next year. Those all take place in near Seattle, Washington. We've just reopened our 2-day workshop series, and we have 6 events coming up in California, Colorado, Boston, Asheville, Copenhagen, and London. So the Copenhagen and Boulder events are happening on the 3rd and 4th of June. So by the time people see this, it might have already happened, but maybe they can jump on the Boston or London event, depending on where they are, or one of the events that are later in the summer. And then we also have a series of online courses that are available, starting with like very easy entry level kind of basic movement and lecture series on movement to, pretty extensive introduction to how to practice parkour in nature and how to build a movement practice that incorporates that with body integration work and mindfulness practices and habit formation, how to go find the spaces near you that facilitate movement, which is a big problem for natural movement adoption. So we've got all those available if people are interested in them. I also have my own podcast and newsletters, and I'm on all the socials, and I'm out there playing the fame game, so it's easy to find me.
Cool. We will definitely link everything into the show notes. And so I want to thank you for your time and for sharing your thoughts and also being personal and honest in this conversation. Yeah. And I look forward for maybe the opportunity to see you also in person if you come to Europe, and maybe even to Vienna. We can definitely try to invite you and introduce you to our community of students here. So thanks again, man. Until the next time. If you want to see more precious and insightful moments, make sure to check our short clips playlist. To see longer interviews, check out the full episode playlist just below it. And to be notified for all future videos, click the subscribe button and don't forget to hit the notification bell. See you on the next episode.